national trust is run by ignoramuses. That is definitely a problem. Well, the war on the West is about what I regard as being one of the most important questions of our time, one of the most important issues of our time, which is the way in which the Western world, particularly led by America, has decided to just have a war on all of its foundations. It's decided that there is a problem with the majority populations in their countries. It's decided that we have to war on our histories in our countries, on all of the philosophical and religious traditions in our countries, and all of the cultural foundations of our countries, so that every day's news now includes stories of institutions that are meant to safeguard our heritage and our traditions, our customs, basically trying to rid themselves of those things as if they're sort of an embarrassment. I think it's something which occasionally crops up above the surface. Some people call aspects of it things like woke. I think that's woefully inadequate for what's going on. I think in the midst of a cultural revolution, an attempt at a cultural revolution, and like all cultural revolutions, we'll see if it's successful or not. I say at the beginning of the war on the West, I actually embrace and like and want the criticism to come. I'm not trying to shut anyone down. I'm not trying to silence anyone. I'm not trying to stop any dissent. Far from it. As you say, Stig, self-criticism and self-examination are signs of civilization. We're able to do this in a way that many other cultures are not. But there is an important line between self-criticism and self-laceration. There's an important line between listening to justified criticism and listening to self-hatred and just things that just shouldn't be allowed, in my view, to just go uncontested. Let me give you an example. I mean, in America, which is the home of these bad ideas, I say in the book that there have been times in the past where America has been a net importer of bad ideas. In recent years, it's been a net exporter of bad ideas, and it's poured out this terrible idea that we can and should understand our own pasts and histories through one single lens, and that lens is the lens of racism. Of course, racism is a part of the history of the West. It's not our history. It's not the totality of our history. Examining slavery again, that's a useful thing to do, an important thing to do. Seeing slavery as being the foundational sin of a country, or the thing we always have to apologize for, or always see everything through, that's not constructive any more than, again, looking at empire afresh is a very, very important, interesting task for Britain. It's not useful to see everything through a colonial lens, so that in the 2020s, people seriously talk about Britain as if we're a proto-colonialist power again. These things tip over from a form of criticism that is useful into a form of self-hatred that is profoundly self-destructive. The national trust is run by ignoramuses. That is definitely a problem. It's run by people today who seem to think we don't know anything about our own history. And maybe that's because the people who run it know nothing about our own history. They repeatedly make discoveries about their properties, which everybody knows. I mean, the National Trust talks about Sittinghurst as if it's absolutely headline news that Vita Sackville-West and Harold Nicholson were not heterosexuals. I mean, these people talk about their own properties in ways that suggest they really know nothing about them. And the same thing with the history of slavery, the history of colonialism. The British public know quite a lot about this. And the point is here, yes, of course the context matters. What is not useful is when everything is looked monomaniacally through this one lens. And I'll tell you that the test I use on this, and it's the same test, Stig, that you could use as an individual. If I said to you, look, Stig, I think there are things you could improve in your radio presenting style. Okay, true. I don't think there are. It's things about you. You would think, quite rightly, I'm not listening here to a friendly critic who wants to improve me. I'm listening to somebody who seems to really hate me, and they don't seem to wish me well. Well, I'm afraid it's the same thing with nations and countries. If you tell me that the history of Britain is only to be seen through a lens of racism, oppression, slavery, and colonialism, I'm afraid I don't think you're speaking to me as a friendly critic. I think you're speaking to me about my country as an enemy. If you talk about the history of the United States and you pretend that it was founded solely in an original sin, that no other civilization in the world had the same sin, only America had slavery, that the founding fathers were no good, that both North and South in the Civil War were bad, that Abraham Lincoln isn't a hero, that nothing good that America did in the 20th century was good. If you do all of those things, you're not really trying to tweak an improvement of America or add context. context, you're simply defaming the country. You're simply attacking it. Well, that's what the West is putting up with at the moment. And so you mentioned the National Trust. Let me throw one other institution in. Tate Britain. The Tate Britain is run by a group of trustees who are meant to safeguard the collection. They're meant to look after one of our great national collections. If you go to the Tate at the moment on the embankment, you will find that they have repeatedly lied about the artists in their care. They have defamed Rex Whistler, who died fighting the Nazis, and pretended that he is a racist. It's a disgusting smear of an artist who didn't survive to defend himself and didn't have time to leave any descendants. They do the same thing with Stanley Spencer. They pretend that Stanley Spencer was a racist because he copied figures from magazines of the time to replicate black figures in one of his greatest paintings, The Resurrection at Cookham. Well, there weren't any black figures in the village at his time. And so what? Why does the Tate have to defame Stanley Spencer as a racist? Why do they have to defame people in their collection? This isn't context. This is unbelievable, self-annihilating, self-hating criticism, largely led by ignoramuses who are directed by bad intent, who don't seem to like very much about our societies. And I, at any rate, would like to urge people to recognize the difference between a friendly critic and somebody who just hates what you're doing. I don't think it's old-fashioned for the members of the royal family to go around the Commonwealth. I think it's deeply old-fashioned to ask them to apologize for slavery. Again, the people who do this are ignoramuses. They don't seem to know the history themselves. Prince Albert apologized for slavery in 1840. King George III was the monarch who actually signed the anti-slavery bill into law. I mean, why do these people know so little that in 2022 they think that it would be appropriate to demand that Queen Elizabeth II apologize for slavery? Thank you. Her ancestors did that 200 years ago. We don't need it to be done now. I'm afraid that what is happening again is bad intent, deliberately bad intent. The countries and the peoples who are saying that the British need to apologize have plenty of things to apologize for themselves, most of the time more recently. It's become one of the great tropes of the post-colonial era that if you want to cover over your own inadequacies, your own failings, your own larceny, your own theft of your country's possessions, that you go and you get back onto the reparations debate. The debates on historical apologies are important, but here's the reason why they're nonsensical today. There is nobody alive who can make an apology, and there is nobody alive who can accept it. When it comes to something like slavery, nobody has been alive for 200 years who can either give or accept appropriately such an apology. We are in an era of grandstanding on this issue. And I'm afraid it's not just grandstanding. Again, it goes back to being self-harm. I would think it ludicrous if a movement grew up in Britain or in Europe asking for people in Africa to start paying reparations for the people stolen by the Barbary pirates, the pirates who went around southern Europe and the coasts of Britain stealing people for decades. I would think it ludicrous to go and ask people in Africa to pay for that. I think it would be ludicrous to go to Africa and ask the people who are descended from the people who sold their brother and sister Africans into slavery to the Arab world and to the European powers in America to pay restitution for that. No other society does it. It's the West that does this to itself. We don't even need people outside to hate us. We're doing such a great job of stupidly hating on ourselves. This is primarily an American argument, of course. I mean, other societies were genocidal about slavery. I mean, the Arab countries, of course, transported at least roughly around 18 million Africans, sorry, they bought roughly or stole 18 million or so Africans, took them to the Arab countries, castrated all of the males so there wouldn't be another generation. So that's how the Arabs addressed the issues of slavery. We in the West were more enlightened about the issue. We had a horrible attitude towards slavery. We did what many other civilizations in history had done and engaged in slavery for centuries, and it was shameful. But the question you just asked about the repercussions is essentially an American debate. And here's the problem with the American debate. The American debate wants to see all inequalities, let's say inequities in modern American society through the frame I've just laid out of racism and slavery. And it's not adequate to the task. There are arguments that, for instance, there are parts of the Black American communities that still underperform in a range of areas, particularly in net economic ownerships, including home ownership and much more. The problem with this is that if you claim that that is only to do with race, or only to do with slavery, or only to do with racism, you ignore the fact that by the 2020s, the picture in America is much more complicated than that. There is a group in America that outperforms white Americans consistently. Who are they? Asian Americans. People who arrived in America in recent decades, often with absolutely nothing. People like, for instance, Vietnamese boat people who arrived in America in the latter part of the 20th century. Did they arrive with any benefits? Of course not. Have they been able to rise? Yes, actually, disproportionately as a group. So when people claim that current inequities in America can be explained solely by the legacy of slavery, they don't confront the reality, which is that we are looking, in the case of Black America, at a multidimensional problem. It is not fit for purpose any longer for people to claim that the underperformance of some elements of the Black community in America is a consequence of slavery. This is a tool that is no longer fit for purpose, and only a few remaining hucksters, race hucksters in the US, still pursue that line of thought. Most people, including most Black American academics of any note, have long away moved on from that. There are publishers who believe that they are not-for-profit organizations. They ignore the majority of the reading public. They believe that they are effectively NGOs of some kind. As I have occasionally had the pleasure of saying to such people, they should say this to their shareholders. They should announce that they are not-for-profit organizations who are some kind of cultural boundary keepers, not very effective ones, it has to be said. No, I think that there is amazing timidity in parts of the publishing industry, particularly in the UK, that is consistently seeking to correct public opinion and tell off the public. One publisher once said to somebody I know that they wouldn't want those sorts of readers. Well, I'm afraid that's a problem for those publishing houses. There are many publishing houses in the UK that do publish, have published me, would publish me. I have no problem getting my own work published, but I do worry, I have to say, worry very much for authors who are starting off, who would like to write books like the ones I write, who have not yet proven themselves in the marketplace, as it were. I worry very much that there is a type of censorship that occurs at the very first level in the publishing world, because so many people in that world are effectively just cowards, and they believe that you should just repeat the same boring left-wing dogmas that everyone can get for free if they sign up to certain news organizations.